Hi everyone, welcome back to Nostalgia Trip, the show where we take a look back at our favorite games from yesterday and see if they still hold up today. I'm Mike Mahardy here with Jordan, and we are looking back at a game that's coming up on its 10th anniversary from a now defunct studio, a game many of you have played and loved and every day are asking for a remaster. Let's get into it. In October 2017, publisher Electronic Arts announced it was shuttering Visceral Games. At the time of its closure, the studio was home to Amy Hennig, director of Uncharted fame, who was leading development on a Star Wars project codenamed Ragtag. The game's development was moved to another studio, and with that, Visceral was no more. But of course, its legacy continued. Despite its modern reputation for sports titles and microtransactions, publisher Electronic Arts has taken its fair share of creative and financial risks throughout its history. Chief among those is the Dead Space trilogy. Heavily influenced by Capcom's Resident Evil 4, Dead Space would go on to become one of the most iconic horror franchises in the medium. It was then, in 2008, that Visceral Games, then known only as EA Redwood Shores, first brought us to the USG Ishimura. All right, Jordan Ramee, you and I both like Dead Space a lot.
Oh yeah.
Came out 10 years ago. Obviously, there's the trilogy of games, Dead Space 1 through 3, and they change a lot. The series changes over those entries. But I want to talk about how Dead Space 1 is very much a horror game compared to 2 and especially 3. But you just replayed Dead Space 1 recently. What's it like going back to it?
It's amazing how well that game still holds up. I mean, I know it's only been 10 years, but horror video games are just so difficult to create just because you need to get that up and down valley of creating dread and then creating that scare to kind of give the player enough time to build up that dread again. And Dead Space does that brilliantly still 10 years later, just with the fact of necromorphs hiding on the ground, the occasional jump scare, but typically Dead Space is a little bit smarter with how it scares the player.
Yeah, and I also love the first 10 minutes of that game, especially when you're coming in and you first see the Ishimura with Isaac, who's a silent protagonist in the first game. We can talk about that a little more later. As you first come on to the mining vessel, and they set up the stakes, they set up the tone, they set up, like, the first time you fight a necromorph, or no, you see written in blood on the walls that'll say, like, aim for the limbs. That game does such a good job of setting up. It like foreshadows everything within the first 10 minutes. It's like an amazing, it's like the first Alien does that, and we can get into those comparisons if you want to, because from Alien to Aliens, it's essentially the jump from Dead Space 1 to Dead Space 2.
Yeah, I mean, this game is just about just this ordinary guy. Like, even when you're just getting off the ship and you're looking at the suit, like, I think his helmet has armor on it, but the rest of the suit is just kind of just a standard spacesuit, and the weapon he uses is not something that you would find in many horror shooters. The plasma cutter is kind of now famous for what it is, this kind of everyman's tool that's used to great effect. I just love the fact that they set it up so well that you kind of see the necromorphs in action before Isaac even has to deal with them, so it's not like you go immediately onto the ship, you get attacked, and suddenly Isaac's this action here. You kind of see behind this pane of glass the necromorphs killing off the two nameless people. Actually, they probably have names, but I've totally forgotten about them because they die in the
Doesn't
first
matter at that point, right?
2 minutes.
Yeah.
And you watch them die, and you kind of get an idea of how the necromorphs act, and then just that saying later, cut off their limbs, that's written in blood, giving you all you need to figure out, like, there's something on this ship, it's very dangerous, and don't go for headshots, because that's not going to work for you.
Obviously, that game does an amazing job of keeping all of its HUD and its UI diegetic. The ammo, your health is all on his rig.
Hold still, Isaac. I'm syncing up everyone's rig with the ship. Okay, we're done. Clean bill of health for everyone.
It's a third-person game, but it's immersive as hell.
Oh yeah. It's like, even when you pull up the map, the game doesn't even technically pause at that point. Like, enemies can still attack you, which makes it really nerve-wracking. We're like, okay, I need to figure out where to go next, but I need to kind of find like a safe corner to chill out, to quickly look through my ammo and my health packs and see where I'm supposed to be going.
Yeah, and as far as it also being a horror game, it's one of the few games that I really enjoyed reading front to cover. The art book, apparently if you look at the Ishimura, if you look at Isaac's rig, if you look at a lot of the design of the machinery in the game, so much of it was inspired by animal carcasses. They're ribs. If you look at his rig, it's very much like rib-like, and so much of that goes into the design of the game on like maybe like even a subconscious level, but also like just an aesthetic level too, and I love that. As you go through the games, obviously they get more action-oriented, especially when you get to Dead Space 3, it's just all-out action, and that's a whole separate conversation about microtransactions and whatnot. But playing back through Dead Space, did you still find that the pacing holds up?
Yeah, Dead Space wears its Resident Evil-like origins on its sleeve, and the pacing still holds up very well. Enemies are introduced a little slow at first, but over time they start ramping up, and the player kind of has to deal more so with the environment than the types of enemies that they encounter, which I think does a really good job of helping with the pacing, because regardless of which difficulty you play Dead Space on, you have to contend with the same environment throughout, and trying to deal with that slowly makes the game more difficult over time.
And there's also currencies and like credits and power nodes that upgrade your rig, and like you don't have a merchant that says like what are you buying, but you have those terminals. I love doing the all plasma cutter run, but there is the aspect of kind of every once in a while you hit a checkpoint, and it builds so well throughout the game that when you reach one of those stations off the tram, you just feel safe.
I was gonna say, there's just a sigh of relief.
Yeah, I love the weaponry in this game. Like you said, it fits really well into Isaac Clarke, the everyman, especially in this first game. He's very subdued. He doesn't have a voice. He's a voiceless protagonist, except for like one line or something. Or no, you see his face, like you said. But later on in the trilogy, obviously, you start to get to know him more. And I like what they did with his character, but he is very much just this engineer that got brought along on the trip. He's like this Bruce Willis from Die Hard, or he's not this superhero. It is a massive bummer, because looking back, Visceral is shuttered now. Unfortunately, people still every day, it seems like, are asking for a remaster collection. I am among those people.
Same.
I absolutely love them, but I think the main question I want to ask you, first off, if I was unfamiliar with Dead Space, is it still worth playing today, whether it's backwards compatible on Xbox One or just going back to play it on its original consoles?
Oh, absolutely. Still holds up perfectly well 10 years after release.
Survival horror games are few and far between nowadays, and I do feel like maybe they didn't reach their pinnacle with Dead Space and Dead Space 2, but I do think that was like, the heyday of those kind of games, that third-person survival horror. Like I said, there are games you could play today, but there aren't enough where I would say like ignore Dead Space at all, because it was the precursor to so much of this, right? Like it was heavily inspired by Resident Evil 4, but I feel like the fact that it's still a miracle that EA, Electronic Arts, the company, if you look at Dead Space 3, we associate so much with microtransactions, with Battlefront games and everything they do with Ultimate Team and FIFA and Madden. It's still amazing that we got these games, and I still think it's worth going back to just to see this point in history for survival horror, for EA in general. Hopefully we're past the microtransaction phase. Again, that's a different conversation with 3, but I cannot stop thinking about how awesome it would be to have like the Dead Space trilogy on PS4 or PC nowadays, and I really hope we get that soon.
I would say, I really want more games like Dead Space, the third-person horror game. It seemed like around the time that Dead Space 3 was on its way out, the entire like scary video game genre was aiming towards what Outlast is, what PT was going to be, this kind of first-person, not really walking simulator, but kind of walking around trying to survive that way. And I miss games like Dead Space. I want games like Dead Space again, and remastering it would be an easy way to bring it back to get new players playing again.
Collision detected in the main hangar bay.